have 4 branches. Oh, there we go. 4 branches, so 4 buckets, 4 arms of work that we do. It's training, education, which is where the work that we're doing now is in training and education. We do some policy reform. We do consulting and assistance and like technical assistance, and we do lending. We do lend, we're a CDFI, and so these are the four arms of the business lines of business that we have at CSH. Next slide, please. All right, so we did this last time. We want to do it again just to see kind of what the representation for the state is. If you go to the top of your screen, there's a view options button, and you can click annotate. And there we're asking for you to kind of circle where you are, identify where you're joining from in Washington. For those of you who are just joining, we're just annotating where we're from in Washington, and in the chat, if you could introduce yourselves, names, pronouns, organization you're with, and then your position.
See a lot of folks in the King County and Kitsap area.
Mm-hmm.
You saw that I put my little heart off the map because I'm New York. There were folks who were here last time. Thank you for bearing with us again. But I know that different folks are going to be coming to different sessions. And so we definitely wanted to make sure that we were able to see who is coming for this week.
Cool. Well, thank you all for taking the time to do that. There's good representation from all across the state, some folks in Eastern Washington. So thank you for joining. We're very excited to have you here. Next slide, please. So this is our agenda for the Medicaid, our plan for the Medicaid Academy. We're in session 2 for provider enrollment. Next week, Amerigroup will be joining us to go over participant enrollment. Then we'll talk about some staffing and budgeting, policies and procedures. And then for session 2, Amerigroup would be joining again to go over documentation and billing. And we'll end the series with quality assurance and quality improvement. So hopefully y'all stick around for the rest of this. We're excited to have you here. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Eva.
All right, thanks so much, Stephanie, and good afternoon, everyone. So today's session is going to be a bit dry, so bear with us. It's not the most exciting. It's literally just a step-by-step process of how to become a Medicaid provider, or essentially an FCS provider. Not the most interesting, but very necessary, because if you want to bill FCS, you have to be enrolled to do so. So this is, of course, the first step, and we'll try to be as clear as possible. Feel free to add questions in the chat, and we'll also sort of pause throughout to allow folks to come off mute and ask questions as needed as well. So this is sort of a process map that gives you a broad overview of the steps required to bill Medicaid. What I want to note is that if you are already, or your agency is already a Medicaid billing provider, so if anywhere else in your legal entity, the legal agency that you are with, is billing Medicaid for any services, you can skip steps 1 through 7 of this process map and jump straight to step 8, signing up for a UEI number and enrolling with WEBs, and then contracting directly with Amerigroup. Because steps 1 through 7 are all about how to enroll as a Medicaid provider with the Washington Healthcare Authority. So if you're already doing so, you don't need to worry about those. But to walk through each step, just to give you a loose overview, we're going to first talk about sort of what you need to think about before you move forward with actually becoming an FCS provider. Then the next step is to apply for an NPI. After that, you will need to apply to become a non-billing provider with the Washington Healthcare Authority. Once you are a non-billing provider with the Washington Healthcare Authority, you can register for ProviderOne. Once you've registered for ProviderOne, you can sign up to receive emails from the FCS team about various grants opportunities available, and finally contract directly with Amerigroup to bill them directly. So let's sort of walk through each of those steps. Step one, the preliminary preparation. So what you really want to think about and consider as you are moving forward with becoming a Medicaid billing provider. We went over some of these last week, and we're not going to go into most of this in detail today, but we will be covering these in future sessions. So stay with us for the whole thing. But there are sort of 4 lenses through which we think about becoming a Medicaid billing provider. And that's one, the programmatic impacts of it. So how billing Medicaid is going to impact the services that you provide and the staffing and training that you will need to make sure your organization is prepared for in order to be compliant with CMS's guidelines, with the Washington Healthcare Authority's guidelines, and to ensure that all staff is properly trained to provide the services that you're billing for. There's also a strategic lens. So thinking about how billing Medicaid will impact some of your business partnerships and how it can be blended and braided for long-term strategic funding and sort of strategic planning with regards to your organization's operations. There's also an analytical component. So thinking about how you're going to manage required data and engage in quality improvement and quality assurance activities. And then finally, the logistics behind becoming a Medicaid provider. So how it impacts your financial operations. It is a significant revenue stream, but also has its own costs. All of this we will get to in future sessions. The legal agreements required and some of those personnel HR considerations. So again, you don't have to remember all of this. We will be going to greater detail in future sessions about each of these components. So once you've made, you've taken that step to decide that you do want to move forward with becoming a Medicaid billing provider, you will need to get an NPI. So what's an NPI? An NPI is a national provider identifier. It's a unique 10-digit identification number for covered healthcare providers. So all covered healthcare providers, which includes FCS provider organizations, as well as health plans, healthcare clearinghouses, they all must use an NPI in the administrative and financial transactions they'll be conducting, which includes Medicaid billing, all of which is adopted under HIPAA. You can apply for an NPI online by selecting create or manage an account, and I'll be showing you on a future slide what that looks like, on the National Plan and Provider Enumeration System website. As you can see, the website is linked in the slide deck, so you will have access to these links through the slides that we have shared with you. You'll need to select a 10-digit taxonomy code that is most closely linked to your credentialing, your licensure, or your role. And for FCS providers, this is most likely going to be the code for case management. That is, that's sort of what the role that HCA and Amerigroup sort of sees you FCS providers as playing. And so that would be the taxonomy code you would select for yourself and your organization. You can select up to 15 different taxonomy codes. So if your organization also provides behavioral health services or things like that, you can select those. But one code must be identified as that primary taxonomy code. And once you've applied for your NPI, you should receive it within 15 working days. And what you'll see in a variety of sort of distributed throughout a bunch of these different slides is these little icons that say key resource, and linked within the key resource are resources, so various explainers or guidance documents that will help you with each of the steps that we are outlining. So here is the CMS NPI application explainer, and it walks you through it's CMS's guidance document for how to apply for an NPI. So this is just like a little, some screenshots of what you'll see when you go to the NPPES website. You'll want to select on the screen to create or manage an account. You'll be notified that you're leaving the NPPES website, and you'll want to select OK. The Identity and Access Management System will give you a number of terms and conditions that you'll want to accept, and then you'll want to click the little Create an Account button down here to sign up and register for your NPI, and then the rest will be walked through. And again, if you have questions for how to walk through that process, you can use this NPI application explainer linked here. So the next steps, once you've gotten an NPI, is to enroll as a non-billing provider with HCA. And you'll do that by completing the non-billing provider enrollment application and emailing it to Matt Christie. So, as I said, once you've received your NPI, you'll need to complete the non-billing provider enrollment application, and this will enroll you as a provider with the Washington Healthcare Authority. And it also creates a record of your organization in the ProviderOne database. Note, this will not allow you to bill HCA directly for these services, and that shouldn't matter because FCS is a program in which you bill the third-party agreement, or the third-party administrator, Amerigroup, so you never would need to bill HCA, but it's important to recognize that you will not be able to bill HCA directly for these services. It will allow you to bill Amerigroup for the supportive housing or supported employment services that you're providing. Note that you'll still need a contract with the Amerigroup to do so, which we will get to in future slides. So once you've completed this form, you can email it to Matt Christie, who's a member of the FCS program team, and he will forward your enrollment request to Provider Enrollment. Please do not submit your request directly to a Provider Enrollment. The FCS team has created a separate enrollment process with HCA to streamline and expedite your enrollment. Also note that under Section 1, the type of practice, you'll enter either supportive housing or supported employment or both, depending on the services you're providing. And FCS providers do not need to fill out sections 4 and 5. Oops, excuse me. Yes, so FCS providers do not need to fill out sections 4 and 5. And it typically takes HCA about 30 to 60 days to process your enrollment application. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you sign this form, you are enrolling with the state Medicaid plan. So this is a legal document, and there's a number of legal implications associated with that. So one thing you're agreeing to is that you will have a federal employer identification number. You will need this for your application. You're also agreeing to have an organizational NPI, which you will also need for your application. And as we talked about, is a first step for actually moving forward in this process. You're also agreeing to follow all state and federal laws regarding Medicaid programs. You are also agreeing to comply with all of the documentation requirements. You are also agreeing to ensure that none of your staff have been convicted of Medicaid or Medicare fraud, and you will regularly check up on this by using the exclusions database, which we have linked here. This will allow you to search for all of your staff and confirm that they are in good standing with Medicaid and Medicare. You will need to make sure that you you keep all of your records for at least 6 years, 6-year minimum of record keeping, that you will submit to any audits as requested by HCA or Amerigroup. Most likely it will be Amerigroup who conducts most of those audits. They're the ones who conduct at least the quality assurance audits. You're also agreeing to become HIPAA compliant if you aren't already. that you will maintain liability coverage, and that you will keep HCA updated on any material changes related to the information that was contained in your application. So some of these include changes to any licensure that your staff have, or liability coverage, if you've changed your address or phone number, etc. All right, so once you submit your enrollment application with HCA, you'll then receive a welcome letter from HCA that contains your ProviderOne ID, and you'll need to submit the application to register for ProviderOne and email that to Matt Christie. So, enrolling in ProviderOne. As I said, once you've emailed your non-billing provider enrollment application to Matt Christie, you'll receive a welcome letter from HCA with your ProviderOne ID and the ProviderOne user access request form, which you can also access by through the link that is contained in this slide. So we've contained up here the non-billing provider enrollment application, as well as the ProviderOne user access request form and Matt Christie's email address here. So what this request form does is it will set your organization up as a domain or an organization in ProviderOne, and it will set up the person submitting the application as a system administrator. When you have those system administrator credentials, ProviderOne will then send you instructions for adding additional users to your domain in ProviderOne. And those different users will have different security and access credentials. So depending on the role that other staff will play, you'll be able to assign them to these different roles. And one of the additional resources that we're going to share and link to at the back of the slide deck is a link to the ProviderOne role guidance documents that you can identify the appropriate security and role credentials for your staff members. So again, you'll want to submit this completed form to Matt Christie. And it's important to note that each section of the form will need to be completed in order to process your request. And I also want to highlight a key resource here, the ProviderOne Billing and Resource Guide, which will walk you through how to use ProviderOne. And this screenshot right here is just what you can expect from your welcome letter from Washington Healthcare Authority. So just a brief overview of what ProviderOne even is. It's the Washington Medicaid Management Information System, and it's used by Amerigroup to submit claims and to submit payment for your claims, and used by you as providers to check your beneficiaries' Medicaid status, as well as SCS eligibility and enrollment, and also verify participant information. So things that include their address, whether or not they're currently incarcerated, any other sort of state-funded medical programs they might be enrolled in, like Health Home. I also want to note that all Apple Health beneficiaries, so all Medicaid beneficiaries in Washington, receive a ProviderOne services card. So you may have your participants or your tenants, showing you their cards. And this contains a unique ID number, and it's required for all Apple Health beneficiaries to receive services. So the ProviderOne is kind of like the state of Washington's Medicaid card, and it's a separate card from the managed care plan that your tenant may be enrolled in or a member with to receive their healthcare services. So they'll actually have two separate Medicaid plans, and what I'm sharing with you right now doesn't necessarily impact your enrollment as a provider, but just some helpful info for you to keep in mind when you're working with Medicaid tenants or Medicaid beneficiaries. So they'll have these two separate cards. One will be their managed care provider card, and one will be their ProviderOne card. And they'll need both in order to receive services. One additional thing to keep in mind is if you have a tenant who may have previously been enrolled in Medicaid in Apple Health, then maybe lost their enrollment or was no longer eligible and then became eligible again and re-enrolled, they don't need to get a new ProviderOne services card. Their same card from their original enrollment will still apply. So once they have been enrolled as a member, they will have the same ID. And I realize I've gone through a lot of information. I actually want to stop sharing my screen and just allow folks to come off mute if they have any questions. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions in the chat or any questions that folks want to come off mute for.
Hi, I have a question. If we submitted our Medicaid billing ID application and we did not submit it through Matt Christie, is there a way to track it down and pull it over into the expedited workflow for approval?
Good question. I think so. Rayanne is on, and I think that she probably will be able to respond to that directly.
Yeah, that's a great question and totally happens. So it'll already be in the queue, but you can email me or Matt. I probably have a little bit more capacity right now. I'll put my email in the chat and I'll track it down and just alert them that you're an FCS and get you kind of on our track to prioritize you. And I can see kind of where you're at in the process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I will share my screen again. All right. So, step 8, signing up for eligibility to receive additional FCS funding. This is an important step because I want you guys to receive FCS funding. So, sometimes FCS will have, offer seed funding or different grants to FCS providers that are outside of the traditional Medicaid claim submission process and don't go through Amerigroup and would go directly through the healthcare authority. And so in order to receive or be eligible for those funds, you need to have a unique entity ID with SAM.gov. So the first step will be to register your entity, so your organization, with SAM.gov. And then you'll want to sign up for vendor emails with WEBS, that stands for the Washington Electronic Business Solution. And those are the emails that are going to be sent out. If you register with this portal, they'll send you, this is how HCA and the FCS team sends out notifications about various grant opportunities. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you are enrolled to receive those emails and that you have a UEI in order to qualify and be eligible to receive funding directly from the FCS team. It's an important step. And finally, the final step, contracting with Amerigroup. So the first few steps that we talked about were all about how to enroll with HCA. Once you are enrolled with HCA, once you've received your ProviderOne ID and your ProviderOne domain and access, you'll need to contract with Amerigroup in order to bill them directly. So you do that by completing the Foundational Community Supports Provider application, as is screenshotted here and linked here. And you'll submit the application along with your W-9 and your signed participant provider agreement form, which I don't have a link for, but have included in the provider resources site I emailed out last night. It is included there. You'll need to email those 3 documents to fcstpa@amerigroup.com. I also linked here as a key resource the Amerigroup FCS provider website, which contains a ton of useful information and resources for providers. It's a really, really great website. has a bunch of different FCS related forms and guidance documents and trainings. And so I highly recommend that you play around with that website and check it out. It's really, really, really useful. So those are the steps. It usually takes about 30 to 50 days from the date that Amerigroup received all of those materials to be contracted and credentialed. So, each step can take about anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. So it definitely, you'll want to plan out a good, 4 to 6 months prior to starting this process. Or prior to preparing to bill, it'll take about 6 months until you get there. So it's lengthy, but it's definitely worth it. So final little bit for you today, we have linked all of the different resources that we mentioned. So here, the website to apply for an MPI is linked here. The document to enroll with HCA, the application is here. To register with ProviderOne, here's the user access form. To register for UEI, this will take you directly to that website. To sign up for grant notifications will take you directly to that portal, and to contract with the Amerigroup, this will take you to the FCS provider application. And then we've also shared the NPI explainer, the ProviderOne user access guidance document, the ProviderOne user access roles and security profiles guidance document, the ProviderOne billing and resource guide, the Amerigroup FCS provider website, and the Washington HCA provider website. And I'm gonna once again stop there, come off, stop sharing my screen, see if folks have any other questions before I show you the provider site that we emailed out last night. I see that we have a question in the chat. I have a supported housing participant who has used all of the $5,000 funds initially approved. I finally found a long-term rental for him and need to know how I apply for additional funds to be able to pay for his move-in costs. Could anyone help me? Okay, we are already billing Amerigroup. This is a separate question. Okay. So it sounds like you have already exhausted the $5,000 transition assistance program funds. Okay, so there are additional funds to help with certain move-in costs, but there is a $5,000 cap. There could potentially be additional grants that FCS might be able to offer that would be outside of the Amerigroup FCS transition assistance benefit. But my understanding is that once you've exhausted those funds, that is what is available to that member. Next week, we will be bringing a representative from Amerigroup to talk all about participant enrollment and billing. And that would be a great opportunity to speak with him directly about this example. And he may be able to share better news than I was just now. But my understanding is that that is sort of the financial cap.
Okay, thank you.
It's a far lesser use, and there's some more stringent kind of requirements. But there is an exception to the rule process that you can go through, Deborah. If you email Joe, I'll put that in the comments, Joe or Scott, they can walk you through that. And there's some information on Amerigroup's website. There is a process, and it basically, you explain what situation you're at, what are you asking for and why, and there might be some back and forth. But there are some cases where we can approve above that amount. But you'll just work with Joe and Scott to do that process. But typically, you're totally right, Ava. Typically, you hit the 5,000 and you're done.
That's right. The exception to program costs. Apologies for the misinformation, and thank you for the correction. Right. So yes, there is the exception. And in the last slide deck that we shared last week, we do mention that, but we will be going into more detail in the future slides or future sessions.
And what was Joe's last name?
There's Jacob Avery, but I'm not sure if that's who Rayanne was referring to.
It's Joe Elder. I'm making sure that I spell their names right, and then I'll put them in the chat in just a second.
Thank you so much.
I see another question. We're already billing Amerigroup for supportive housing. One of our clients only shows Amerigroup on her medical coupon on ProviderOne, and her claims are being denied by Amerigroup because they are saying she doesn't have Amerigroup housing coverage. Does this make sense? Amerigroup housing coverage. So it might be that she's not enrolled as a participant with the FCS program, in which case next week we will actually be walking through the steps to enroll your supportive housing participants. So just because, and we mentioned this last week, and we're going to keep mentioning this throughout the entire Medicaid Academy, just because someone is enrolled with Medicaid and is eligible for FCS does not mean that they're enrolled at FCS. So there's sort of the two processes that need to happen with like decision trees that branch out from within both. So there's the provider enrollment, and then there's the participant enrollment. And within that, it's provider enrollment in HCA, like with Medicaid, and provider enrollment with FCS, like with Amerigroup. And then similarly with the participant enrollment, there's participant enrollment in Medicaid, and that's them having an Apple Health card and a ProviderOne ID. And then there's participant enrollment in FCS. And so it very well could be that they're not enrolled in FCS. And Deanna, if I'm misunderstanding your question, please feel free to come off mute or elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, she was eligible for housing. And her medical coupon showed that she had Amerigroup, and then she also had Amerigroup housing. That was prior to her coming to us as inpatient for inpatient treatment, SUD treatment. Then when she got out of SUD treatment, she went into our housing, and she does not show housing on her medical coupon any longer. When her and I sat down and we tried to call, we called Amerigroup. They told us to talk to HCA. HCA said, no, we don't do that. She has to talk to Amerigroup. So now we're kind of at this standstill and not knowing, what to do. And so I'm currently not getting paid for the services we're providing her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm really sorry, Deanna, that you're having that kind of back and forth. So I'll put my email in the chat again, but if you want to email me, and then we can kind of coordinate, and I can look her up and see what's going on and try to navigate what the issue is there. There are some boundaries around FCS, around whether or not we can serve them in some settings, but it doesn't sound like this person would fall under that. So if you want to email me, we can connect, and I can kind of look her up and navigate what the situation might be and figure out any solutions.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. And I'm happy to say that you're in great hands with Brianne. So I know that you guys will get to the bottom of this. I see that Barbara put in the chat, we have several providers in our area. Can a person only be signed up with one provider? You're talking about a participant enrolling in FCS for supportive housing and supported employment?
Yes.
So yes, so they can only receive supportive housing services from one provider. They can only receive supported employment services from one provider. Brianne, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe they are allowed to receive separate supportive housing and supported employment services from different providers. So let's say there's a tenant living in, supportive housing, I'm just making up a name, Tacoma supportive housing. but you want them to receive supported employment program services as well, they can then all receive supported employment services from Tacoma Supported Employment Incorporated, or made up those names. But does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So what I'm hearing is that the same person can be enrolled with two separate providers for housing and employment.
Correct, exactly. But
Thank
they can
you.
only receive supportive housing services from one supportive housing provider and
Yeah.
supported employment services from one. Exactly.
Thank you. That was the clarification I needed. Thank you.
Right. You're welcome. And I see that Rayanne has added in the chat the contact information for the transition assistance program, so that you can find out find out more about the exception to program rules. And again, we'll also be going into that next week. She also included her email address in the chat. It's also in the back of the slide deck from last week, are all of the FCS program managers and their contact information. And she also linked for a change of provider request. There is a form on the Amerigroup FCS page, so that is linked there as well. Any other questions that folks have? I know this was a pretty quick overview. Oh, Cedric, I missed the part about the slides. Yes, so that's a great segue. I'm going to actually show you now the website that we've created and shared with all of you that you can access. I don't know. I want to allow folks to ask any other questions before I transition. So anything else folks wanted to cover? Because I recognize this was a pretty quick training, just sort of a nice overview of how to get enrolled. The future sessions will probably be a bit longer, but I also don't want to take up too much of your time because I know it's precious. All right, I'm going to segue over very quickly and show you the site that we've created to access the slides. Right. All right, so I sent an email out last night, and if you did not receive the email, but if you did not receive the email, I will put my email in the chat and you can send me an email requesting the email again. But in the email I sent out last night, it contained a link to the FCS Spring 2023 Medicaid Academy provider resources site that we've created. This site is password protected because it is part of the CSH SharePoint extranet. And so you'll need to make sure that you use that password, but this is what it looks like when you go to the site. You will then log in with the email credentials that you have, and then the password is FCS 2023 at Academy. So it's FCS in all caps 2023 and then Academy, but the A is actually an @ sign. Then we sign in. It didn't work. Maybe I typed it in wrong. I don't know why it's not working now, but what it does look like.
I think you're trying to sign into your Microsoft account, not your.
Oh, that's
yeah.
taken to the wrong site.
So I don't
So
think it asks you for your email.
yeah, it shouldn't ask you for your email, so I don't know why it was doing that. But what it does look like when you sign in is it will look like the 2023 Medicaid Academy. Each session has its own folder. Session 3, not populated yet. So any of the sessions that we have not, that we've not held will not have materials yet. The materials will be added the Monday night before the session. So in session 1, we've got the slides, and then we have the recording from last week's webinar. So the Monday before the session, we'll add slides and any other training materials. And then the Tuesday evening, so the evening after this session, so tonight, we'll be adding the recording from the webinar. So contained in session 2, these are the slides. And then there are our provider enrollment materials. So we've got the HCA application materials here. We've got the Amerigroup contracting materials here. And then we've got guidance documents for all of them here. And linked in the slides are all of those same resources. All right. So any questions about that? Okay, so I'm going to put the password here. That is the password to access the site. And I will link the website. If you bear with me for 1 second, let me pull up the link. And that is where you can find all of the materials for this training. All right, let me quickly share my screen again. Okay, so walked you through the resources, and that's our training. We have a few minutes, and I would love it if you guys would take our feedback survey. You can scan that QR code or click the link. Please, please, please complete the feedback survey. Your input is really, really helpful for us. We want to make sure that these trainings are useful. Obviously, no one wants to attend a training that is not helpful. I certainly don't. So we really appreciate your feedback. Next week, we will be covering participant enrollment, and we will be joined by representatives from Amerigroup who will be walking you through all of the steps. And this is so critical to attend because they are the ones who will be approving your claims. So you definitely want to make sure that you attend this session. This will cover how to ensure that your tenants are enrolled not only in Medicaid, but in FCS. And how to check that they are. So it'll be next Tuesday, May 2nd from 9:30 to 11. And you can scan the QR code to register if you have not already. I'm going to leave the screen up for the next few minutes so that folks have access to the links and the QR codes. But feel free to hop off when you're done. And thank you so much for joining this training. And we'll see you next week. And we'll stay on a little longer. If you have any additional questions that you want to ask, you can feel free to come off the mic or type questions in the chat.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, hi, my name is Christina. I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, hi. I've been doing these webinars and trainings for a while now, and this one's been pretty informative. There was a lot of familiarity for me for some of the contracts that you had up, and for business involvement as an independently owned contractor. I've been doing some other webinars that involved the federal code PIN and trying to explain the system administration and things like that. But since I'm independently based, I've been trying to find work with behavioral health, but I'm kind of an independently based consulting business that I've been trying to get started. Does this qualify for service registration? Say if I wanted, because I'm recovering from mental illness, so I'm trying to enroll myself and benefit from business and legal ethical issues. This service industry, does it support like individualized business owners?
Yeah, so you can definitely sign up to receive grant funding from WEBS. FCS is really specific to organizations providing supportive housing and supported employment, and I believe you need to have a federal employer ID number to actually be eligible for that. But you can't, so I don't believe that you can actually bill Medicaid for the housing services you're providing for FCS. But I believe that you can apply for some of the grants through WEBS. Rayanne, I'm not sure if you have other info that you want to share with Christine about being an individual provider, individual contractor.
Yeah, so I think web sounds like the best step to me. That'll let you kind of choose what categories you fit into, and then you get announcements based on those categories. But the Healthcare Authority, we just kind of made another move in terms of really trying to prioritize the small and diversity or like diversely owned companies or organizations in terms of our contract. So really trying to target some of the smaller places. So you should see quite a bit on WEBS if you register. And then I'm pretty sure you're right, Ava, on the number, but we do have a lot of FCS agencies that might be only one person doing those services. So if you meet all of the qualifications, you can absolutely provide FCS as kind of a sole person, but you just have to meet all the other kind of pieces of your MPI.
Well, I understand, a business diversified group. I actually applied for a job as an FCS peer counselor at Frontier Behavioral Health. They just haven't gotten back to me yet. They've just offered me services as a participant and client. So I'm doing my best to forge through these trainings, but thank you for your information. I really, because I am kind of an independent contractor and I am studying student wise. So thank you.
Of course, and if you want to get involved, if you're interested in getting involved in other sort of areas within the supportive housing landscape, if this is an area that you're really interested in, you can feel free to reach out to Stephanie and me, and we'd love to talk to you about that.
Thank you, ladies. You guys have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you.
So I can look at all of these. I'll have to figure it out. It takes time. Thank you.
It absolutely does. It's a complicated world, but we definitely want to try to make it as easy as possible.